Today, I'm going to be talking about what I believe now. Welcome, friends, enemies, and everyone in between, to my channel, The Masked Mormon. I am, in fact, the Masked Mormon.
Why are you wearing a mask? Were you burned by acid or something like that?
Oh no, it's just they're terribly comfortable. I think everyone will be wearing them in the future.
I am a Mormon who used to believe in the truth claims of the Mormon Church. Now, I was truly a hardcore believer. Then, after a pretty intense faith crisis, I realized that the church wasn't what it claimed to be. Now, I talk about the implications of Mormon doctrine, history, and some of my own personal experiences on the internet with you fine viewers. My faith crisis really knocked me for a loop. I went from a strong certainty in the chief tenets of Mormonism to an existential crisis that left me spiraling. Those of you who have experienced this probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, I joined the church as a teenager. Though I had a strong belief in science and empiricism, I also balanced that with a strong belief in God and Jesus. I held these beliefs even before I joined the church. In the 7th and 8th grade, I took on the challenge to read the Bible in its entirety. I found it to be very violent, but since I was told it was so important since I was a little kid, I just accepted the stories as fact. I remember that as I was making my way through Deuteronomy, it described the importance of animal sacrifices. And it got me thinking, if that's so important, why aren't we doing it now? And should I be doing it? Now, I knew as a teenager I couldn't afford anything as ostentatious as an ox or a bull to sacrifice, but maybe I could do something with a bird. Maybe if I took my BB gun and then I could burn it. Oh, no. I didn't actually kill and sacrifice a bird, but I was seriously considering it until I eventually learned that in the New Testament that such sacrifices weren't necessary anymore. Now this has me kind of thinking, with the political push in some states to teach the Bible in schools, based on my experience, maybe that isn't such a good idea. If a kid takes it seriously, like I did, they might start doing some pretty gnarly things. Not to mention all the violence, incest, genocide, and assault that it contains. And that's just from the good guys. Not to mention how angry and violent the God of the Old Testament is. Now, as I got through the Old Testament and into the New Testament, I couldn't help but notice how angry and violent the God of the Bible was, until he seemed to really chill out when I got to the Gospels. Now, even though I had these thoughts, I still wanted to believe it. It gave a sense that there was something more. Now, I've had a sense of my own mortality from an early age, and an understanding of an afterlife was frankly very comforting to me. My mom and I went to a small Christian church in town for several years. I prayed regularly. Then my family moved several times and it totally upended my social support systems. But I was a pretty good kid. I never got into any kind of trouble. So when we moved again, I pretty easily fell into the Mormon crowd. The Mormon girls noticed and talked to me, and one of them even wanted to date me. Sweet! But there was a problem. I wasn't Mormon, and Mormons are only supposed to date other Mormons. So the missionaries got involved, and I got baptized, joining the church. And I really dove in. I believed the Joseph Smith story. The historicity of the Book of Mormon seemed plausible at the time, and I was incorporated into my branch socially. Though I never accepted things like young earth creationism that was taught in seminary, or Noah's flood, but I lived what the church taught me. And I lived it for about 20 years. I went on a mission, I went to BYU, I was married in the temple and had kids. But then things started to unravel. I noticed that my lived experience and the lived experiences of the Mormons around me didn't really match up the stories that we were told, both in the scriptures and in church publications. Priesthood blessings never seemed to work. We really seemed to be repeating the same things over and over again, especially in Sunday school. Now, there is a 4-year cycle for Sunday school. Each year they cover one of the books of the Mormon canon: the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Book of Mormon, and church history, including the Doctrine and Covenants. Every 4 years, the same questions would be asked, and they were shallow and ultimately leading questions. I realized more and more that the teaching was shallow and self-referential. It was really, how do they say, it was a mile wide and an inch deep. Sacrament talks would rehash talks from leaders from the previous conference. Again, just repeating and referring to itself over and over again. It felt more and more like I was repeating the 5th grade over and over again. So I started to delve a little deeper, and as I did, I noticed more discrepancies from the accepted narrative and history. The Book of Abraham especially sent me for a loop. When I learned that the documents that it was allegedly based on didn't match Joseph Smith's translation, it felt like my world shattered. This initiated a bout of existential torment like I had never experienced before. It felt like the bottom fell out of the room, and I was falling into the abyss. All of a sudden, an afterlife and everything else was called into question. It was kind of like that effect in movies when the camera zooms in and pulls back at the same time. And as I explored further, I deconstructed more and more until I no longer believed in any of the tenets of Mormonism. But I hung on for dear life as long as I could. But the evidence made it very clear that it was all made up. And the tools that I used to deconstruct Mormonism were then turned to religion more generally. And the narratives of the Christian religions didn't stand up to scrutiny any more than Mormonism did. Eventually, I realized that God was a man-made invention, at least the God worshipped by the various religions. So where does that leave me now? Now, I do struggle labeling myself an atheist. That word comes with a lot of baggage in our society. And it is true that I believe in God about as much as I believe in Zeus, but I am open to the possibility that there may be some being out there somewhere in the multiverse that could be considered a god. But that isn't the God of the Bible, or frankly, of any religion. I admit it would be comforting to believe in a God, but I have yet to see any compelling evidence. Sure, some people may say that they know for sure that God exists, but this is usually filtered through various subjective experiences and interpretations and cognitive biases. I don't find the convergence of any number of coincidences compelling evidence to suggest a God is active in people's lives. Usually, the miracles that people claim happen can be attributed to, I don't know, maybe people coming together as a community, like when a disaster strikes and people help each other out. Or in something like advances in medical science and understanding, like when someone recovers from an illness or a spontaneous remission occurs, or something fulfilling our evolutionary imperatives, like when a baby is born and we have a deep sense of connection, or even meeting our evolutionary survival instincts, like when we act altruistically, and also sometimes just random coincidence, like when a person survives something that seems should be unsurvivable. All of that taken together with our penchant for pattern recognition and finding meaning in the meaningless is usually enough to explain people's encounters with their chosen God. But a believer may ask, what about the miracles described in the Bible or the Book of Mormon? Aren't they compelling? No. People can make things up and then write it down. People can lie People can embellish. People can misinterpret based on incomplete information. They have for our entire history. Just look at Joseph Smith and his creative mind. I put as much stock in these stories as I do in the feats of Hercules. Mormonism has a lot of miracle stories as well, which I will go over in a future video. But as you closely examine them, you realize that they were ordinary stories that were either embellished or completely made up, like the seagulls and the crickets, or President Nelson's crashing airplane story. People have an amazing ability to turn the mundane into the miraculous. Just go to any Mormon fast and testimony meeting. That said, I do hope that there is something out there. I am open to the possibility. The universe has been around for a very long time, and perhaps there are realities beyond what we currently experience. But if there is, I find it hard to believe that it would be concerned about whether we drink a cup of coffee, or who we love, or the words we say. Such a being would necessarily have much larger concerns. And the various religions seem to make a God in their own image, and that God seems concerned about very small things. Now, this may sound like I am anti-religious. I'm actually not. I think that the religions serve a very important role to people. I have observed that people have an innate need to worship something, whether that be an object, a person, nature, or some unseen deity. It seems as natural to us as hunger or sex. If tomorrow we were to wake up and all of the religions had suddenly vanished, within short order, new ones would develop to replace them. I strongly ascribe to the thesis of the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, that mythologies are an important part of being human. By mythology, I don't necessarily mean made-up stories. I mean a set of stories, legends, and folklore that we tell each other to help bind us together. Our nearest ape relatives, the chimpanzees, groom each other to build social cohesion. But we don't do that. We tell each other stories, and those stories bind us together. Our various social constructs are a set of myths that we share. The concept of the United States is a myth that binds over 300 million people together as a nation. The concept of money is a myth that we have all agreed on that conveys value. The religions are a myth that people share to build a closer social and moral fabric. Without myth, we wouldn't be able to exist beyond small tribes of about 100 people. Our cooperative power comes from our ability to build and share myths. Ideas are powerful things. Shared ideas can change the face of the world. Those ideas, however, often need to be moderated by reason. The Crusades, the Inquisition, witch burnings, Jim Crow, the Red Scare, the Satanic Panic, 9/11, polygamy, Mountain Meadows Massacre are all things that happen when we let our beliefs spiral out of control. The problems really seem to happen when we believe that a person speaks for their specific God or ideology. Now, it's easy for power-seeking people to subvert and hijack these natural human tendencies. We all have a need to belong to a group. We are a social species after all. Now, in the distant past, to be rejected by a social group led to social shunning and exclusion from the group, which could then be a death sentence. A lone monkey is a dead monkey after all. Our various mythologies and social groups do things that benefit the individual and the group as a whole. That seems to be where our various moral codes and traditions come from. These mythologies are often aspirational. They can inspire us to be better or to act in ways that benefit others in the group. ask not what your nation can do for you, but what you can do for your nation kinds of ideas. Now, I believe that we need to find a mythology that inspires us. That might be a religion, a club, or in my case, a fictional world. I find the world of Star Trek to be very aspirational. The mythology it builds paints a picture of humanity, not as it is, but what it could be if we are able to unite behind our shared humanity. If we could leave tribalism behind and become a single human race, we could accomplish amazing things. I like to reflect on the Vulcan philosophy of infinite diversity and infinite combinations, a philosophy that celebrates the vast array of variety in our universe, or in our case, on Earth. The Federation is an idealized representation of what the United States could be. Poverty, disease, and war are all problems that Earth was able to solve. I think aspirational philosophies all share a common thread. They are transcendent and try to make people better than they currently are. For instance, in Christianity, the philosophies of Jesus, especially regarding the poor, sick, and socially marginalized, could do a lot to improve the lives of billions. Unfortunately, many who claim to follow after Jesus will ignore these very central philosophies and instead follow after a bastardization of their chosen political, economic, and religious ideology. A person's chosen political religious philosophy can have aspirational qualities, but they can also end up being hijacked by very loud extreme voices, and rational discussion is all but impossible to manage. Another fictional world that has had a deep impression on me is the television show The Good Place. Now, if you haven't seen it, you should really check it out. But over the course of the series, as hilarity and philosophical explorations ensue, it continually raises the question of what do we owe each other? The show asks us, why should we choose to do good? And it tries to answer that we should choose to do good because of our bonds with other people and our innate desire to treat them with dignity, and to remind us that we are not in this life alone. Now, as I pass people every day, I try to remind myself of that. What do we owe each other? I think that is dignity, respect, and compassion. And though it can be hard, maybe even a little patience. Now, I don't believe that there is some scoreboard tallying points to admit me into a good place or to condemn me to a bad place. And I don't think that some Star Trek-like future will necessarily happen. But these fictions help me reflect on how I can become a better person. Someone might then ask, well, if you don't believe in God, what stops you from assaulting and murdering someone? Or they might even ask, where does morality come from if there is no God? Do you believe in moral relativism? Well, to mirror the comedian Ricky Gervais, I already do assault and murder as much as I want to, and that amount is zero. None at all. I have heard religious people say that if there was no God or fear of hell, they would do untold horrors to the people around them. And I have to retort, if the only thing that keeps you from doing terrible things is the belief in a punishment by a God, then you are not a good person. I think that people are often good not because of their religious beliefs, but often in spite of them. People generally can be cooperative and good to each other. And I feel that our morality is an evolutionary and social construct. Because we are the most successful as we cooperate with each other, and being shunned from the group was a risk to our own survival. We try not to do things that will get us ejected from the group. This can include things like murder or stealing or not being generous. Those moral imperatives seem to be pretty universal across all human groups. Now, how this relates to other groups not in our tribe can be very different. War, genocide, plunder, and exploitation of other groups seems to be just as universal. Finding similarities or struggling together seem to be things that can knit different tribes together. Europe used to be in a constant state of war. England against France, Spain against Portugal, Germany against everyone, twice. But after the horrors of World War II and the fall of the Soviet Union, we saw the rise of the European Union. Similarly, we're starting to see the rise of an African Union as 55 nations in Africa unite in an effort for greater unity and cohesion. In the rise of a more global human civilization, people are trying to make bigger, more interconnected tribes. The other aspects of morality are more locally driven. What words people can say, what clothes are appropriate to wear, who you're supposed to love, what substances are you allowed to partake of, are all dictated by local customs that can change over time. So yes, I believe in moral relativism. And I think that religious people are moral relativists too. They will think that it's okay to kill, steal, and lie at different times, especially if they ascribe to a divine command theology, which states that whatever God commands is right, or doing those things against people that are outside of their own chosen ideology. I ultimately believe, though, that we can expand the borders of compassion and understanding. Now, a believer might ask if I believe in an afterlife. I'm hopeful of an afterlife. I currently like existing and would like to continue existing. But, like God, I don't see any evidence to suggest that an afterlife is a reality. I personally do find near-death experiences somewhat compelling, but those could just be the release of feel-good chemicals in the brain before death. There are a lot of physics-based reasons not to believe in an afterlife. One of the chief ones being the second law of thermodynamics. An infinite amount of low entropy energy would be required to sustain a being forever. Plus, the nature of forever is something that we really can't comprehend. However, there may be realities and physics that we do not yet understand that open this possibility. The fact that there is yet undiscovered physics is a current problem in science. It is not yet known what dark matter and dark energy are. There is a disconnect between the models that are used to predict the expansion of the universe. There is a divide between general relativity and quantum mechanics that needs to be bridged. And we know that our current understanding of gravity itself is incomplete. On top of that, we don't know what consciousness is. However, I do want to be careful and not commit a God of the gaps fallacy. I hope there is something after. But, most likely, I realize that there is nothing. Most likely, as I die and take my last breaths, my brain will release a bunch of chemicals that will calm me, relax me, maybe give me some hallucinations. But then, nothing. Just like the lack of awareness I had before I was born, I will similarly have a lack of awareness or even existence after I die. The matter that builds my body will return to the earth. The energy that comprises my conscious mind will dissipate and return to the universe as heat. Which reminds me of a quote from the aforementioned The Good Place that has really made a deep impression on me, especially as it relates to the relationship between life and death. Quote, "Picture a wave in the ocean. You can see it, measure it, its height, the way the sunlight refracts when it passes through, And it's there. And you can see it. You know what it is. It's a wave. And then it crashes in the shore, and it's gone. The water's still there. The wave was just a different way for the water to be for a little while. You know it's one conception of death for Buddhists. The wave returns to the ocean where it came from and where it's supposed to be. End quote. We are each a wave on the ocean, a wave for the water to be for a little while. Now I can hear some believer ask, so what's the purpose of life then if there is no God or no absolute morality? And to that I say, I am, at least for now, an optimistic nihilist. Nihilism is a philosophy that life is without intrinsic value, meaning, or purpose. This philosophy can sometimes result in a sense of despair or justification for cynicism, and nihilism can at times lead to psychological harm. But optimistic nihilism is the ability of a person to create their own meaning after they accept that the universe is ultimately meaningless. The universe existed for a long time before we came along, and it will exist for a long time after we are gone. Even the Earth's long history, before humanity, generations of countless creatures existed and passed on. Eventually, the sun will expand and consume the Earth, and the universe will continue on without us. The universe has no purpose beyond the fact that it just is. Similarly, for our lives, there is no imposed purpose. So, we get to choose our own purpose and the values that we will live by. Now, this can be an empowering view, allowing people to determine and embrace their own purpose. Now, isn't that just hedonism? Well, I guess it could be, because we of course should eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But again, we're here now. For the moment, we can make a difference in the lives of those around us. Will that eventually fade to history? Yes. But I think to the parable of the starfish. Quote, "One morning after a big storm, a man was walking along the beach that was littered with starfish. The man saw a boy feverishly throwing starfish into the ocean, and the man asked why the boy was doing this. The boy replied that when the sun gets high, they'll die unless I throw them back into the water. And the man said, 'There must be tens of thousands of starfish. I'm afraid you won't make much of a difference.' As the boy leaned down to pick up another starfish and threw it into the ocean, he replied, 'It made a difference to that one.'" End quote. We have the potential for positive change in the world, but it can be daunting in the face of massive social problems. But a single ordinary person can make a difference, and you add together a lot of single ordinary people, they can make a big difference. Now finally, in keeping with the water metaphors, you pick up a stone and throw it into a lake. Waves will ripple out, reaching things far and wide from where the stone was thrown. True, the ripples will eventually die away, returning the lake to a state of calm. But that doesn't change the fact that for a time, those ripples were there. No, I don't believe that there is a purpose to our lives, which means that we are free to choose what meaning we want to have. What purpose do I believe in? I think the purpose of our lives is to learn how to love and how to build memories in people that will continue on long after our wave returns to the ocean. Now, I know this video wasn't very Mormon-centric. As a person leaves a religion behind, they may be asked, "Where will you go?" And ultimately, they don't need to go anywhere, but they will often need to figure out what they now believe and how it relates to their previous beliefs. Such an exploration can help them not feel unmoored. They can reflect on their values and what they want next. So, what do you believe in now? What mythology or fiction have you adopted that inspires you? What are your thoughts on what happens after death? What anchors your morality? Let me know down in the comments. And if you like what I do, please press the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.